Hello, everybody. I'm Dr. Jeff Katzelman. You are tuning into the Silver Hill Hospital Grand Rounds program, and we'll get started in just a moment. Thank you for joining us. I always think it's a little like Jiffy Pop, watching the numbers, and when they start to slow down, I know it's time for us to start. So here we go. Here we go. Thank you, everybody, for being with us today. Big welcome. Want to send your way. Again, I'm Jeff Katzman. I'm the director of education and of the Silver Hill Hospital Academy for Research and Education that we call SHARE. We are absolutely delighted to have you join us today and really privileged to welcome Elaine Miller-Karas, LCSW and co-founder and executive director emeriti of the Trauma Resource Institute. She'll be presenting today on the topic of the Trauma Resiliency Model, a biological model to reprocess trauma. Before we get to that, a little bit of housekeeping. Our next grand rounds take place on October 8th with Doctors Gilmore and Mearsand, who will talk to us on the topic of emerging adulthood, the new developmental phase of the 21st century. And to those of you who are local to Connecticut or want to come into Connecticut, to Silver Hill Hospital, we invite you to join us on Friday, November 7th, when Dr. Ben Bernstein and I will be presenting and leading an in-person experiential improvisational training for a psychotherapist course, which we've done in various contests, and it will be a lot of fun and I think morale building for anybody who attends. And to learn more about all of our Silver Hill or share events, please visit us at silverhillhospital.org/calendar. Additional note I'd like to give today with a bit of an apology. We put our Grand Rounds programs together a year in advance, and we realized a little bit too late that we scheduled today's program on the second day of Rosh Hashanah. So my apologies for that. And this, of course, will be up and taped for anybody who can't be with us today. We will take note of that next year. Back to today's lecture, your questions remain an important part of our grand rounds, and I will moderate a Q&A discussion with Elaine at the end of her lecture. It's a great opportunity to put forward questions and comments to Elaine, which you can submit anytime during the lecture by using the Q&A link. Please don't use the raise the hand function, but use the Q&A link instead. Additionally, if you would like CME or CEU credits, please complete the evaluation survey that will automatically show in your browser when we end the webinar. A link to the survey will also be emailed to all participants today. Note that this email will be a Zoom email coming from SHH Events, and the email will also contain a link to the recording and slide presentation. So that everyone has enough time to complete the survey, it will remain open to the end of day on Friday. Certificates will then be emailed within a week. And please note that while doctors may receive partial credits based on the length of their participation, all other attendees must participate for the full 90 minutes in order to receive credits or certificates. Any questions at all about that, please contact us at shhevents@silverhillhospital.org. Last but not least, disclosures. No planners of this activity have indicated a relevant financial relationship with an ACCME defined commercial interest. And Elaine will also show a slide with her disclosures. So it really is an honor and my pleasure to introduce our guest speaker today, Elaine Miller-Karas. LCSW. She is a social worker and trauma therapist, author, lecturer, consultant, and Voice America radio show host, Psychology Today blogger, and social entrepreneur. She's been called an ambassador of hope in the fields of trauma therapy and community resilience. As a co-founder of the Trauma Resource Institute, Elaine serves as the executive director emeriti. She has led the development of the trauma and community resilience models, which have left an indelible global footprint impacting over 75 countries. Her book, Building Resiliency to Trauma, the Trauma and Community Resiliency Model, second edition 2023, has been recognized by the United Nations and Taylor and Francis. She's a regular contributor to Psychology Today and has presented internationally at Oxford University School World Forum, the United Nations, Resiliency 2024, Medscape, Psychotherapy Networker, the Global Fund, the Carter Center, and the Centers for Disease Control. How do I know Elaine? Well, about 7 years ago, I myself became involved in the resilience world, not knowing really so much about it at the time and becoming really a student of resilience, particularly during the pandemic when all of us were trying to understand this. And I was connected to someone, a nurse practitioner named Lindy Grabby, who was a trainer of the community resilience model and a protege, a student of Elaine's. And so I got to meet through the years Elaine and have been so inspired by the model, by her work, and Elaine, by really everything you're doing. It's a joy to talk to you. So I just am so happy that you can join us today. And thank you, a big, big thank you. And
Oh, thank you, Jeff, for having
yeah,
me. And it's always wonderful to talk to you. And I think this is such a timely topic. Trauma is so in the world right now, and we work internationally, and we have seen it in all the different countries where we work. And I always feel that we as therapists, I think we are ambassadors of change. And I kind of feel like an advocate as well, that if we have strategies that can help people to somewhat heal from these horrible storms that happen to us in our lives and the chronic injuries that continue, the micro, macro aggressions, all of this, I think, is a timely subject. And I also want to just honor also all my Jewish friends and colleagues during this time of Rosh Hashanah. And and I will get started. So
great.
here we
And I
go.
will see you at the end, unless we have any internet troubles then, and then I'll pop back on, let you know.
Yes,
Okay.
so hopefully we will
Yes.
not, because he mentored my dear friend Lindy. I am at this moment in Atlanta. I usually live in California, and I'm in a hotel, and I have paid for my upgrade of my internet access, but we were having a little bit of trouble with it, so we're going to hope everything is fine.
Now it's good.
So,
All right. See you in a bit.
yeah. So my disclosure, so in compliance with the ACCME standards for commercial support of CME, I do not have any relevant financial relationships to disclose in relationship to this presentation. These are some of our learning objectives, and I'm going to describe at least two key concepts of the trauma resiliency model. I'm going to describe two or more skills of the trauma resiliency model and recall a free app called iChill, and I'm actually stating it right now, where clients and practitioners like yourselves can reinforce the wellness skills of the trauma resiliency model. And we now have our iChill app in English, Spanish, Ukrainian, Hebrew, Arabic, and and we're soon to have simple Chinese, Korean, and Portuguese and Haitian. So we're expanding our app to have many languages. I hope to have many more as the time goes by. So let me tell you a little bit about what is the trauma resiliency model. First of all, it's a somatic neuroscience informed approach, and it's designed to support and reprocess and integrate traumatic experiences. So what's a little different about TRIM, I'm going to call it TRIM from here on out. The wellness skills of TRIM are also called CRIM, the community resiliency model, and they're also designed for us because, as we know, we may have an active private practice like I've had in my life, where I would see 8 people a day, and person after person had a heart-wrenching story. What happens to us? But we can also learn the wellness skills of TRIM in order to help us show up as our best selves and also kind of clear out our system between each client that we have so that we are in our zone of well-being. So as a social worker, in fact, I kind of smile when I say this, it's rooted in neuroscience. That wasn't my first love. It might have been a first love for many of you, but I have now become a total neuroscience nerd. I am not a neuroscientist, but as some of my friends have told me, one of my superpowers is taking complex subjects and making them simple. And a newly minted therapist told me actually this week, he said, Elaine, thank you for creating this because sometimes it's really hard for me to understand what people want me to teach, but I think I really understand this. So that is a big compliment to me. And of course, I hope that's true when you hear some of the concepts of TRIM. But it's a bottom-up regulation model, and it's about nervous system regulation, and that's at the core. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about the details of what I've learned working internationally of how to help people with this model. So I've seen where it helps clients, have relief in their body and their mind, have new meanings about what happened to them, and also have greater emotional regulation. There's a woman that I met in the Philippines after a big hurricane they had, and we responded. And when I was teaching her the wellness skills of the model, she said, thank you for reminding me what I already knew but had forgotten. And that to me, I mean, it was a wonderful day when she said that to me, because that's what we're helping people to connect with is their natural ability to cultivate their well-being. And I believe that is an aspect that we all can do for ourselves and we can help clients do. So we teach the 6 wellness skills. And as we teach these 6 wellness skills, we encourage people to integrate them into their activities of daily living. And the additional 4 skills are practitioner skills for actually reprocessing the embodied traumatic event. So if people ask me all the time, well, what was the basis of this? How did you come up with this? And so, I made this picture on my AI, and I thought, well, that was pretty cool because I said, this is what I want in the picture. And so I feel like I stand on the shoulders of people that have come before me. And I had some of my own ideas, but some of them come from things that you already know, and you'll go, well, I kind of know that already. And so, but there are things that I've learned as I'm now in my 70s. So I've been a therapist for over 40 years. So I've learned many flavors of the year or the decade. And then how did I kind of pull them together in terms of the creation? And one was I was a teacher of family medicine in a big family practice department in California. And it was an amen hallelujah moment for me when I read the Adverse Child Experiences study that published in the late 90s. And I just know about it right now, but I just want to, this is a trauma informed model. Because I think what I loved about ACE is that it formed us at understanding the implications of childhood trauma or on implications for physical and mental health outcomes through a lifetime. And I think when, the original study and subsequent studies about community environmental traumatic experiences increase our knowledge of how the mind and the body are directly impacted by adverse child experiences. I have to tell you, and I'm sure many of you felt this way when you first read this, we already knew this, but the fact that it got the medical field was a game changer, certainly for me as a teacher of family medicine, because I wanted to affect those young doctors and I needed to speak their language. So when I brought in anatomy and physiology and saying when trauma happens to someone, it not only happens to their feelings and their thinking, it happens to their body. And so TRIM looks at anatomy and physiology, the study of structures of body parts and their relations to something's happened to you. I was working in China after one of their big earthquakes, and there was a gentleman that said ever since the earthquake, he hadn't been able to feel his right arm. And so when I was speaking to him about what happened to him, he said, oh, well, the building started to fall, and he had put his arm up like this to protect the children that were with him that day. And so essentially had a dissociated arm. And so part of an embodied trauma resiliency model approach is helping that person be able to bring back that arm into his whole self. And so understanding the anatomy becomes really important. And of course, physiology is study the functions of the body. So what we do in TRIM, we utilize observation and knowledge of the nervous system's patterns. So one of the most important things, I want to repeat that statement because it's very important, is that to track sensations and to learn to distinguish between sensations of distress and well-being. That's one of the most important things that we can teach our client because they're not with us every day. And when they're home and they get triggered by something that is a multisensory reminder of their trauma, they can have something in the present moment that can help them intersect when they're nervous system gets hijacked to bring themselves back to present moment awareness and also focus on their well-being. So, well, the other thing that's so imperative that we all know, and I think those of us that have been therapists for a long time, there are common human reactions to stressful and traumatic events that affect the mind, body, and spirit. And so, if I had a longer time with you, we'd be in breakout groups talking about what you've seen in your experience. But the reason why I wanted to talk about this slide is that when I was working in family medicine, people were coming into the healthcare clinics and they had physical reactions. They weren't saying, "Oh, I had a traumatic experience, and then I have physical pain, or my heartbeat is beating, my heart rate is very fast all the time, or my muscles are tight, or I can't sleep." But when those started to be linked between trauma impacts the body, and I helped the young doctors understand that, then their approach was different. And I think for those of us that are psychotherapists in whatever way that we're trained, is that helping to understand that these are common reactions, and we try to change in the model that it's not because you're disordered, it's because you're incredibly human. Because I have asked the same 6 questions literally all over the world. I've been to so many countries. What have been the common emotional, thinking, physical, behavioral, spiritual, and relationship reactions you've seen? And they're all the same answers. Whether I'm in China, Europe, Africa, the United States, Canada, um, they're all the same. So that is something that in many ways helps people feel a little bit of relief that what they're experiencing is not because they're abnormal, it's because they're human. But there's ways that we can help them by understanding simple neuroscientific concepts. And this nervous system, it's so simple. It's learning about the accelerator and brake of your nervous system. And this is how I talk about it. Many of you that may be trained somatically already know this, but the sympathetic prepares us for action. Our breathing rate goes up, heart rate, right? If we had a blood pressure cuff, we'd see our blood pressure going up, right? We sweat, the stress hormones are released. It's meant for short action because our digestion, saliva, of course, that kind of shuts down because all the action is meant for the energy to maybe escape from something or to do something that we love to do, like run a race. But then after we go into a sympathetic reaction, we also want our body to come back into rest. The parasympathetic, which the breathing rate slows down, we can feel our heart rate, muscles relax, our digestion comes back on this track, and you can feel the saliva in our mouth. So we help people understand this, and people go, "Oh, well, since that thing happened to me, I've had really dry mouth." And so because they've been in a sympathetic, hyper-aroused state. So we help them understand that connection, which is so helpful. And then we have a common language that we use, and we use the resilient zone. We also have been calling it the zone of well-being. I work a lot with children. We call it the OK zone. And I wanted to bring this slide in because I wanted you to see also those of you that are trained with the polyvagal theory, see that how it can align with the polyvagal theory. So when we talk about the high zone, that sympathetic hyperaroused state, it also signals danger in terms of the polyvagal theory. So we might be going to a fight and flight. We may be rageful panic. If we're in the high zone, we may say things that we regret and have to apologize for. The zone of well-being, and I notice that it is a rhythm, and it's not like the chill zone. You can be annoyed, you can be angry, you can be sad, but you can manage those feelings saying, and I can tell you there's been lots in the world that I've been a little bit upset about recently, and I can feel that kind of passionate anger that has a little bit of heat in it, actually. It's a little bit of it's a sympathetic charge, but it's not going into the high zone. And that actually makes me a strong advocate. So I'm still in my zone. But also in this zone of well-being, we do see the parasympathetic system. So in the polyvagal theory, that would be the ventral vagal dominant. We see that social engagement can happen in that zone of well-being and that people can rest. But also the excitatory response, a little bit of the sympathetic that's added in there, can be when you talk about something that, like, I love roller coasters, for example. And that I get happy. I think of where I grew up in the Bay Area of California. There's an old one in Santa Cruz I used to ride. You see my smile? I mean, of course, you can't see my smile because you can't see my video, but I have a smile on my face. And that feels I have a sense of well-being when I call up that memory. But of course, we can get in the low zone. That could be life threat in terms of the polyvagal theory. It is part of the parasympathetic system. It's the dorsal vagal dominant. And that's when a person can go into freeze, immobility, collapse, and people can get stuck in the high zone or low zone. And those are the folks that come to us. High zone may come with us with a lot of anxiety, post-traumatic stress conditions, low zone depression. Um, and what's important about that is we have this language that explains things very succinctly to clients. They start using the language. They come back to your office. They go, all this week I was in my high zone, and all those skills that you taught me, some of them worked and sometimes they didn't. So it gives us a non-pejorative way to talk about the phenomenology of being human. And I'm going to ask you this question. I can't see your hands. How many besides me have ever been in their high zone? How many besides me have been in my low zone? I'm raising my hand, right? In both of those. And then how many of you have been in your resilient zone, your zone of well-being? So when I asked that and I could see everybody, usually everybody's raising their hand for each one. So this is why this is the common language that we use. But the other thing that we try to do in this model, because we also really lean heavily into the biology, is we talk about 3 levels of stress. And this is this is in alignment with the ACEs study. So we talk about positive stress, which we've all experienced, right? We've had to take a test. So maybe our heart rate goes up. We can feel, oh, we take the test and okay, we oh my gosh, we take it, we pass it, balance returns quickly. But then there can be tolerable stress, and that's a time-limited stressor. So we still have the same kind of physiological responses. They're short acting, but we needed a little bit more help. So maybe I just want to go back and talk about toxic stress and the toxic. Continue to share. Hold on. Is important because this is when, and I put it in terms of the nervous system. It's like you have let's say you put your car on park and you're gunning the engine. So your car is not moving, but you're the most activated in your nervous system. And so I use this as kind of the metaphor to talk about toxic stress because it's the ongoing and relentless experience that the body goes through with intense stressors. This is what happens with kids that have developmental trauma, and they're living through this through their lifetime. So that prolonged activation of the stress response systems in the absence of protective relationships, when we're talking about kids, for example, create the perfect storm of the nervous system. And some of us have this through our lived experience as adults. We may be in toxic work environments. We may have had things that happened to us in our life, like domestic violence or other kinds of experiences. Or, I work a lot with people of color and find that, the macro and the macro aggressions that people are experiencing, or something like anti-Semitism or xenophobia, things that are these stressors that become part of someone's fabric of their living. And sometimes I don't have an awareness that that's causing this arousal in the nervous system. So helping to understand this very simple biological aspect can help them understand their responses in a different way. Because if we're in a sympathetic, hyper aroused state, high zone or low zone, it affects our behaviors. So the model is what we call is resiliency informed. Adversity is not our destiny. And we have the human capacity to expand and strengthen well-being. And we're actually designed to increase our well-being, but we have to do it with intention. So I am a big fan of Dr. Richard Davidson from the University of Wisconsin. And he talks about 4 resiliency circuits. And I have to, when I first read this, I first read about this. Actually, I was reading the Book of Joy, which is an interchange between Desmond Tutu and His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And in the book, they talk about these resilience circuits. I go, I have to learn more about these. So the resilience circuit is the rapidity in which you recover from adversity. In his research, he says, it can take thousands of hours to restore your resilience circuit. However, if you are a practitioner, let's say of meditation, of prayer, you do a practice that cultivates your resilience circuits, then you can change that. Now, there's also a positive outlook circuitry, and that one was very intriguing to me. We have a healthy and robust positive outlook circuitry that we can see and recognize the positive in others and as well as the ability to savor our positive experiences. They have seen that when people are depressed, they can still have a positive outlook circuitry, but it doesn't last as long. So, what can we do to cultivate that? Well, in their research, they found that you can cultivate that through the wellness practices. It only took like 30 minutes a day for 2 weeks to change that. So, in our model of TRIM, we integrate these wellness practices not only during session, but to practice outward. And we see change starting to happen when our clients come back and say, I've been feeling better because they've been cultivating their well being. And the attention circuit, which I thought was so fascinating, when they did research on the attention circuit, that 47% of us don't pay much attention much of the time. And what's important about paying attention, this model, we pay attention with intention. Paying attention to our nervous system and to our sensations of well being can help to cultivate that. I often use a garden metaphor. Have you ever had a garden or seen a garden? What if you only pour water on the weeds and not the flowers? Then how are they going to expand? And it's not that we're a positive toxicity model, but that helping to understand these circuits enlivens people in a simple way. The generosity circuit is something I cultivate and use as a practice with people. So if you engage in generosity, in acts of generosity, so let's say that you yourself, you help your neighbor, and maybe they're elderly and you help to take out their garbage every week. That you doing that act helps to enliven that circuitry in your brain. But if you are noticing an act of generosity, or if someone is generous to you, that activates the same circuitry. So if you give wellness practices to your client, or even ask them, when was the last time that you remember that someone did something generous for you, or that you notice an act of generosity, even something like I love Hallmark commercials, and I think because there's usually an act of generosity. So we help people understand the circuitry and that they don't have to be trapped by these natural rhythms in our bodies that happen as a result of toxic stress, that there's resilient circuits that means they don't have to be trapped by those storms of their body. And that when they start drawing attention with intention to sensations of well-being, it can transform their experience. And just like there's different seasons in the body, I might bring that in as a metaphor, but I use different metaphors depending on who I'm talking to in trying to help this. But the key to the trauma resiliency model and to our wellness skills is interoceptive awareness. I didn't always know this, but I know it now, and people call it body literacy. It refers to attuning to the sensations originating from within our own bodies, much like how we acquire reading literacy in childhood, right? So we can develop that ability to tune into the bodily sensations and decipher how our body sense influences our daily decisions and behaviors. When we start to do that, so it's a game changer for people, and they find that they can start looking at themselves and the things that they do in their life in different ways. Like when I go I'm getting into my high zone, I get very hot ears, and that's my cue. Oh my gosh, I'm getting there. I better use the skill. I often ground with my hands. I'm often on Zoom. I can feel myself coming back into my zone of well-being. Now, therapies and somatic psychology, which I was very drawn to when I was a teacher of family medicine, and I took Peter Levine's somatic experiencing. And those of you that are SE trained, or most of us have, gone to workshops with Bessel van der Kolk or Peter Levine or Pat Ogden, Babette Rothschild, all those folks have been my teachers. And I became a somatic experiencing practitioner. It took me 3 years. I have great respect for what they do with SE, but I also was a social worker working in a community where the social workers that I work with couldn't afford to go to expensive trainings. So I wanted to create something that was accessible and affordable. And if you wanted to become a TRIM practitioner, and let's say you look at our website and go, I can't afford to do that. We give scholarships to people all the time because I never wanted people not to be able to learn about how to help their clients with a body-centered model. And so, I look for funding that people can, donate to us so that we can provide those scholarships. In fact, right now, we have a scholarship program for people who are working in Los Angeles, who are therapists that are working with fire affected people, that people can take our training at a much lower rate, or in some cases, they can come for free. So we have tried to do that to make this body-centered model more accessible. But also neuroplasticity is key to this model because when, what do we always think of these fancy names? It just means the brain can change. And when people understand that their brain can change and that we're designed that way, it gives them a great sense of hope. And also they start seeing the benefits of it when they start cultivate their well-being with the wellness practice. And then there's the work of the wonderful neuroscience, Dr. Linda Feldman Barrett. If you haven't read her little 7.5 lessons of the brain, it's brilliant. But reading her work also inspired me to think, oh, well, I need to help people tune their nervous system. If what Dr. Davidson is saying is true, and his research is bearing this out, positive experiences can change the actual structure of the brain by increasing the number of connections between neurons. And so as we do that, and we cultivate that, and you can see that this image is a image of most of us have been on hikes where we can see there's a well-worn path and there's a path that people used to use that is now we can't see it as visibly. And so we can prune those neural connections and they're weakened. And sometimes they disappear, but also that they just become less lessened so that people don't get as activated when they start tuning their nervous system to those positive experiences. But the other aspect of TRIM, and I remember when I first read this article a few years back, I said, this is exactly why we focus on the biological basis of threat and fear and how to restore well-being, because trauma affects the parts of the brain also responsible for verbal processing and cognitive functioning. This was a mind and heart study that was done in 2013, and they looked at 178 individuals who met the full criteria for PTSD. And the participants with PTSD scored significant processing speed, category fluency, verbal learning, and verbal recognition than those without PTSD. And the authors concluded that PTSD, they had significantly poor performance in several domains of cognitive functioning. So what really inspired me about this was going, well, if we only have cognitive interventions, if we're only trained in cognitive kinds of interventions, then are we limiting the amount that people who have been so traumatized by their life events can really grasp onto and hold on to? And I'm not saying that, interventions like CBT, of course, are helpful. I've been trained and used to use Christine Podesky's book, Mind Over Mood, all the time in my practice. But I always then added the body components. If they were reorganizing and wanted to think differently, I'd say, and what are you noticing in your body as you're saying that? And that became life altering for people, bringing that interceptive body literacy into it. I also read the book of Dr. Jean Ayres. She was the grandmama of occupational therapy. She was one of the first people to say we need to pay attention to neuroscience when we're creating our interventions. So her sensory integration theory, she was the first one that said that I could find that she said that grounding and how we sense ourselves in the present moment, which she called gravitational security, is essential for children and adults to be able to be in their world. She was seeing kids, and she found that the kids that had a lot of trauma and the kids that came to see her with sensory integration, what she called disorders, they didn't have the sense of being present in the here and now. They felt like the world was spinning around them, which I see in trauma, and that people are just used to it. And so something as simple as putting a heavy blanket on your lap, or putting some pillows that have some weight on your feet can all of a sudden make you feel swoosh, you're back in your body. And people even say, go, Elaine, did you just turn a light on? Because everything around me, I can see a little bit better. So helping them understand that their body can be their friend is also part of what we do in TRIM. So I read, oh my gosh, Insoo Kim Berg, who's long gone now. So many people that I'm trained in have gone on to the next world. But solution-focused psychotherapy And that approach, and that she was one of the first ones that I heard say, you know, our clients know more about how to solve their own problems than we do. So we ask curiosity questions. And this is the hardest part for those of us that are well-trained therapists, is we don't interpret. We ask the person when we see a change in their nervous system and they come into that state of well-being, I'm wondering right now from this space, are there any thoughts, feelings, or meanings about this problem or this experience that you've had? And people say the most sacred thing. And there's a difference. And we've all heard this in our practices, right? Where people say, that's right. It wasn't my fault. But they say, oh, you're right. It wasn't my fault. And there is an embodied experience that goes along with the statement that is profound for people, especially when they design their own meaning, not from our interpretation, but from what comes out when they're in a more regulated state. I asked a very famous neuroscientist this question once. I said, why is that when they're doing this in my model, that oftentimes when they're in that state of integration and the flow is coming, you can tell the flow is in their entire body. He said, oh, it makes sense. There's more blood flow coming to their prefrontal cortex. So people tend to be more solution focused. Well, we have a research study that was just done about our model in Rwanda with genocide survivors, that there was a statistically significant increase in compassion and forgiveness. Boy, do we need that in our world right now. So that's exciting when we look at those kinds of questions and how we answer them. And then focusing. Anybody who does a somatic model would have had to look at his brilliant focusing. And he was the one that came up with the felt sense. And that when I read that little booklet and it said, oh, sensations can change. And they do rapidly. And they not only can change because of, the multisensory triggers of trauma and stress, but they can change with intention when we cultivate our well-being. And finally, in my many experiences of life, way back when I was a Lamaze childbirth educator. And what does that have to do with being a psychotherapist? I was also a doula. I was with many women, and this was back in the 80s, long ago, before I became a social worker. But what that taught me was that there were natural rhythms in the body. Birth is a very painful physical experience, but when you have someone with you, the same way that I look at you as psychotherapists, when you have a person with you that has gone through such terrible things, and you can be their gentle guide to help them through what also can be natural rhythms that happen because of trauma, but also happen when their nervous system is being really transformed by by wellness skills and by reprocessing that traumatic experience. That can absolutely be a life altering for people. So those natural rhythms and are being a very gentle guide is a very helpful part. So that's what it's based on. I know that my time is kind of quickly going away because I had a little bit of a late start, but we still have a little bit more time. And I'm going to tell you about the key concepts, the 10 skills of TRIM. I can't teach you all of them, of course, in this introduction, but these are the 6 wellness skills: tracking, resourcing, grounding, gesturing, shift and stay, and help now. With we say the skills are in the palms of your hand. Here's the iChill app, and you can learn all the 6 skills today if you want to by just downloading them. You'll listen. If you're English speaking, it's going to be my voice. If you're Spanish speaking, it's my dear friend Martha Parra, who's a licensed clinical social worker. I have very many collaborators, and if you go to the part that explains about the model, it says all the dear people that are the voices of the wellness skills. And it's free, which I love. And we also have ichillapp.com because sometimes I work with people that don't have smartphones. And then we say in the model, what else is true? So this is a little exercise I'm going to do with you right now. And this exercise is how I often start out, even after the horrible disasters. I live in LA. We've been working a lot with people who have survived the terrible disasters in the Palisades and in Altadena. But we ask questions about, I usually ask the question when I'm in a disaster, what or who is helping you get through right now, if anything? but these are other questions we can ask in a strength-based approach. So right now, think about the answers to either one or all of these questions if you like. What or who uplifts you? What or who brings you joy? What or who helps you through difficult times? And as you think about your answer, I'm going to also invite you to do something else. I'm going to invite you to notice the sensations connected to your answer to the question. And I happen to know that Dr. Jeff Katzman might help me for just a moment. It might be helpful even for just a couple minutes, Jeff, if you can come with me for a second and we can show them how this can be helpful, I hope, for you. Would you like to do this with me? It's an invitation.
Absolutely. Are you kidding? Anytime.
Okay. Well, so would you like to pick the answer to one of these questions and tell me a little bit about it?
Yeah. Um, I get joy when I'm on a cliff on a misty day in various parts of the country and looking out at the ocean and the ocean waves with the mist rising. That's a kind of a joyous image for me.
So do you have in your mind's eye an image right now of one of those times what you
I
were?
do. I
Yeah.
do. Yeah.
So are there different smells that come in or sounds of this
Yeah, I'm
image?
thinking about the cliffs in Big Sur, uh, and,
Uh,
and I can hear the waves crashing like 40 feet below, and I can smell the salt water and see the mist rising, and there's a kind of a forest around me also at the same time, and I can feel kind of the little bit of moisture on the bench I'm sitting on, and the
ooh.
smell of a kind of a crisp forest.
And so as you're describing this to me, would it be okay if I asked you what you were noticing on the inside? And this
Hmm.
what you notice on the inside as you see yourself on that bench on the cliff.
I notice my feet kind of in the planted in the ground, a kind of warm feeling in my chest, kind of electric feeling in the back of my neck and up my kind of top of my head, and just a expansive feeling like I'm connected with what's beyond.
And is that a pleasant sensation
Yeah,
that
yeah,
you're?
all very pleasant.
Yeah, so can I just invite you to notice that pleasant sensation and
Mhm,
really notice where it lands inside the body? You described some places, and I actually noticed your deeper breath
mhm.
right when you started describing it. Yeah.
Yeah, space in here,
Yeah.
space in my chest, and yeah, now kind of warmth in the back of my neck and down my arms and in my chest.
So I'm just going to invite you to continue to kind of nourish those sensations
Hmm.
and to notice them. And also to know that you can call up that image anytime that you want. If you're having a little stressful day or you kind of think sounds like you do a lot there in Connecticut right now, and bring in that image and it may help you.
Great. I'm going to call it Big Sur. I'll give it a little handle.
Well, you didn't know this about me, but Big Sur is one of my favorite places,
Oh, is that
actually.
right? Did
Yeah,
I describe it
yeah,
well?
you did. It was beautiful. I was there with you. I was there.
Perfect.
I was actually at a restaurant. I go there, and
Nepenthe?
yeah. Oh, we said at the
Just
same time. Okay, here we go. Yes,
you can chew me
Nepenthe.
a soda.
Oh,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, there we go. I have a chill too. And so the other thing that's interesting about this is that when a person describes a resource, if it's a resource for us, we can experience too. So it's the positive feedback loop that also is something that neuroscientifically happens, right? When we're in our zone of well-being, it impacts the people around us. And I let people know that. And they go, oh, that's true. And they'll say, when I was with my husband the other day and I noticed that he calmed down. So it can affect the people around us as well. So Jeff, thank you so much for this little
Absolutely. Thank
demonstration.
you. Thank
So
you.
yeah, I hope
All right.
that
I'll be back in a bit.
okay, bye-bye. And I'm
Bye.
going to keep going. So these are the skills that are the four reprocessing skills. And I have adapted this from many of the great thinkers, Peter Levine, Pat Ogden, to our own model with my own ideas about them. But I actually use the same words because I thought the words were right. And so I always also do acknowledge that contribution to this model. So they're titration, pendulation, completing survival responses, and also integration. And that integration is like the last step that is really quite powerful to see. People often ask me, Elaine, I need a scaffolding and or some kind of, a how do you do this? So I came up with the idea of a scaffolding because it helps and aid workers, right? They wanted a protocol is the word I was trying to find. So a scaffolding aids workers to allow access to difficult places to reach. Isn't that sometimes the same thing with trauma? So the next slide I'm going to show you is the same is true with our trim skills. So all the 10 skills are here. It's kind of a lot of stuff, isn't it? But when you learn the model, really the body is the portal, and that's why it's hard to do a protocol. The thing that I will say about a protocol is we always do want to make sure the client can sense neutral or pleasant sensations before we take them into their traumatic experience. But essentially, sometimes I'm moving up, sometimes I'm to the side. It depends on what the person is presenting. And part of what we do is that clinical encounter. Where did you notice that when Jeff told me about that, I noticed he took a breath. And I said, oh, I noticed you took a breath. I didn't say take a deep breath. So we don't direct breath, which I know is very different for many people that have done breath practices with their clients. And not to say it's not helpful, but for some people that have had a lot of trauma, especially sometimes childhood trauma, even though the breath is like life-giving, the breath can be a traumatic trigger. So that's why we notice breath rather than direct it. So, and we inquire, I asked him, it seemed like it was pleasant. So I didn't have to ask him, oh, is it unpleasant or neutral? But sometimes I don't know. So we inquire in this way. And it's not, I don't say positive and negative on purpose because sensations just exist. And I want them to start to encourage them to start being the best tracker of their own nervous systems. And so that's why we use invitational open-ended language. And I already told you about interpretation. So the first thing we do is we give psychoeducation about the key concepts of TRIM. We explain the basic 3 skills. So I want to know that they can track, resource, and ground. They can sense those sensations of well-being. And then once they can do that, then I can go to the next step, which was really asking them about what's happened to them. But I think the other thing that I let people know, I asked them if it would be okay, is because we're working with the human nervous system in this biological based model, that sometimes it's helpful to take a resiliency pause. Some people call it a well-being pause, just to check into the nervous system to see how you're doing. And sometimes we'll just try to maybe bring back that image of Big Sur. If I was working with Jeff, for example, that may help the nervous system quiet a little bit as they're telling me maybe about the worst thing that happened to them in their life. And it's not to cut off the experience and the telling of it, but it's helping them to understand that they can share the experience with what some people have told me sometimes take days to recover from once they've gone to revisit something that they've experienced. And they also learn that, oh, that's like the first time I've talked about this without feeling like I take a day off of work. So it can give people that experience, that knowledge of that I can within that kind of zone of well-being, even when I'm talking about this very difficult experience. So the guidance of the practitioner is so important in helping to observe their nervous system. And also I ask permission whether or not a person can continue to, if I can observe their reactions and feed them back to them. For some people, that's too intrusive. So sometimes I use my own nervous system. I might say, if they're telling me about a resource, for example, oh, as you told me about, that place in Big Sur, I noticed I took a deep breath. So trying to mirror sometimes what I see in someone that they may not want me to call out for them to remember. Um, so there's simple ways that I start with talking to people too, and also about explaining that. And it's just as simple as saying, if you want to tell me about the experience, I will ask you occasionally to pause so the experience doesn't become too much for your nervous system. Anyways, sometimes I have not known the entire story that someone has experienced, and yet I've been able to help them, and they have felt relief by just working with the body sensations of reprocessing that traumatic event. There's so much more to say about the reprocessing part, because once they start telling the story, because we're completing survival responses, and survival responses are a huge part of what we do, that are naturalistic, and there's 4 in our model. There is tend and befriend, fight, flight, and freeze. I personally do not like the word fawning because it's often used as a pejorative word towards women, but tending and befriend does have a biological imperative because it is quite common, and tending befriending tends to happen more with women than with men. And I have never read anything about people that are non-binary, but any of us can be tending and befrienders, but it's about protecting the social group. And it's not, and so when people talk about fawning, they talk about it being maladaptive. To me, tending and befriending is about survival, surviving of the group and others. So here's all the different survival responses, right? We educate about the survival brain. We help them understand that it's instinctual, that it's not because something's wrong with them, it's a biological imperative. We talk about a survival response continuum, and that is part of kind of, I guess, a protocol, because there are different things that we would do as a practitioner depending on whether or not phase 1 is orienting, phase 2 is mobilizing to tend and befriend, fight and flight, and phase 3 is the completion of survival responses. So what happens with people, many people that have trauma, they were not able to complete a naturalistic response, so that the reactions in their body that have to do with traumatic stress are because they weren't able to complete a survival response. So in the present moment, we help them complete that survival response. And people say to me, like, practitioners going, well, how can you do that? They really were raped. I said, well, yes, they really were, but we are working with implicit memory, which has no time and space. And that's a key to the model. We can change the body experience in the present moment, even though they did have that experience and they couldn't get away. But in the present moment, in implicit memory, they can complete a survival response. The physical movements, the vocalizations they couldn't make then, they could make now. And that causes nervous system release that leads to the 10th skill, which is inviting the person to sense the integration that happens in their body, that for many people is just life altering and transformative. In the model, when we teach these skills and we help people reprocess, of course, some people don't want to sense their body. And so that's why we have other models that we can use. Now, I never use the word, I say there's a lack of readiness to do this kind of model. Um, I don't, I don't use the words resistance in my practice, because I think a lack of readiness, I respect that maybe it's protective of a person, that for this moment in time, they're not ready to do a certain modality because of that lack of readiness. And of course, the primary thing is to do no harm. That we as a practitioner, in order to be able to help people with an embodied kind of intervention, also have to be able to sense our nervous system and be able to cultivate our well-being. And of course, with any model that anyone learns, we have to learn how to use our consultants well. So I'm going to stop there because you have all this information in your slide presentation, and you can go to our website that has all the articles that have been written. We are an evidence-based practice for our wellness skills, and the whole model is being, people are doing uh, evidence-based randomized controlled trials now as we speak, and I'm hoping to have that as well. It's been harder to get the evidence for the entire model, but we certainly have it for the wellness skills. So Jeff, I'm ready for questions.
All right, Elaine, thank you so much for such not only inspired presentation with which we were dealing with the disruptions of the gods of the web and
I
internet.
know, I'm so sorry about that too,
No,
but
no problem. But also just really a career, a lifetime career of dedication to helping people and creating a model and studying it is just remarkable. What you've done. So to everybody out there, go ahead and um, put some questions in with the Q&A link. Margot Gross has sent us some kind of acknowledgments about the importance of sensory integration and in working with people, also occupational therapy in mental health.
Oh, that's great.
Um, and
So,
also that she knows Nepenthe and that she was in the hot tubs of Esalen. Well, of course, which is the hot tubs of Esalen is what I was, a bench right
oh,
out there is kind of
I-
what I was
you
thinking of.
know,
Yeah,
and
who could not
people
feel
know that and
resourced
know that
there?
people could be clothed or not, so you
Yes,
never
yeah.
know.
Um, there's a question here. Logistics, is your scholarship only for LA residents for the courses?
Well, no, and we do have a scholarship program for anyone that wants to come through the, just say what the reason is. We have a Paul is our person that screens people. I mean, we often ask if there's something that you can pay, even if it's a smaller amount. And sometimes people have been able to pay. It's I think it's $950 per 3 days altogether. It's $1,800, I believe. And so sometimes people can pay 300, and so that's fine. And I would rather have people trained than not. So to know that if any of you are there saying, God, I'd love to do it, but I certainly couldn't afford it, um, just go to our website and we'll make it happen for you.
So great, great. There's a question here, well, a statement, but I'll turn it into a question. Can the model be used with clients dealing with other diagnoses like anxiety outside of the trauma?
Oh, absolutely. Really, I haven't found anybody that I can't use it with. I think it's hard, and even one of the client populations that I actually love to use this model with was people with parts. I know we have integrative family systems, by Richard Schwartz is a brilliant model, but we bring in the body. And so bringing in the body, like, the resource, Jeff, that you just did about Big Sur, a person could have 15 different distinct parts, and maybe they have awareness of every part. So I would work with every single part to find out what their resource is. If I'm working with a 5-year-old, it might be a teddy bear, but a 30-year-old, it might be their partner. So what I've seen that happens in that case, for example, is when you help one part have a resource, it affects the whole system.
Mhm.
But I really probably that's probably the work that is the most inspirational to me, that people have had such horrible childhoods and
And yes,
can be helped. So
to that, some of those parts are experienced really as just somatic experiences. Yes.
exactly, because some of them are infant parts. And that, of course, is I've had people, in little fetal positions in my office that are like gurgling. I know that may not be why some of you became therapists, but I can put a blanket around that person. I can try to help them be nurtured, put a pillow underneath their head and nurture the physicality of that. Now, there's different, of course, rules and regulations that every state has in terms of touching clients. And sometimes, though, I think that's very important in this kind of work, touch, but to get your proper consents and permissions that also can be taken away, and especially that's tricky with parts, because some parts will say, oh yeah, you can touch my arm, and another part will say, get the hell away from me, don't ever touch me. So you just learn how to respond, because I also learned in working with parts, for example, that different nervous systems respond differently. But even with people that have been given a diagnosis of psychosis, and let's say they're starting medication, I can help them with the wellness skills, because people with persistent and chronic mental health conditions, they've also been, as we know, traumatized by our systems sometimes, and so they can be helped in that way. And I didn't know that in the beginning, but it can, and it can be really life altering them. I also want to let you all know that you can go to our website. We're having an offering that's $25 or free if you don't have any money. On October 4th from 9 to 12, we have a psychologist in Los Angeles, Dr. Jamie Gamboa, who's going to do a presentation. I've already seen her PowerPoint. It's excellent, on how to use a biological model with neurodiversity with clients that you might have that are on the spectrum.
Great, great. Thank you so much for that. There's a question here, maybe connected to that a little bit. Any tips for clients who have difficulty visualizing or tuning into their sensory memories of an experience that
Yeah.
brought them joy?
Well, first of all, number one is that some people have a really difficult time with images. And some of us can just create things and we can be there just like you did, Jeff. And for others, it's harder to do that. So with people that have a hard time with experiencing things inside the body, have in your office an array of sensory experiences. So, like in my office, I had a big bowl of rocks of different textures, some sharp, some smooth, and some shaped like a heart. I had some that had courage on them. I say, pick one of the rocks, see what you notice. So I'd have them hold the rock. I said, well, is it heavy? If you touch it, is it smooth? So I'd work outside the body first so they would know that they can sense things, but it may take a little bit more time to go into the body, especially when people are in those low zone states. When people have gone into freeze and live a lot of their life in dissociation, what they may say to you when their first experience sensation is, I'm just numb. I'm numb, numb, numb. And remember, numb is a protection piece, whatever reason sent them into dissociation was so horrible for them that that's the way their body respond. And that doesn't respond, it just happens automatically. They're not trying to be numb. But if they can start to sense even small little sensations that just even may be neutral, it's almost like you're waking up someone who's been in suspended animation for years. Because what's so sad about, the answer to the question, if they can't sense their well-being, it's so hard for them to sense life in any way of being joyful or happiness or even being neutral. So it's just so important for us to sense things.
Right
So
on.
can be
Yeah.
helpful to go on a sensory walk with someone. I don't know if you can go outside your office and say, let's go for a walk and see if there's something that catches your eye that you like. Like there could be like a rose bush, or, even if they were to smell something that sometimes they go, oh, I like the smell of roses, or to have different scents. But also, I just want to caution people, many people use essential oils and sometimes they're really great. But let's say if your attacker was wearing, let's say, lavender, and you say, oh, lavender is about healing. Well, that sensory reminder is about an attack. So make sure everything that you do is invitational because not everything is going to work with every person.
And only just to kind of underscore this, what you kind of demonstrated with me and what you're talking about now with the rocks in the office or sensory walks are all forms of kind of resourcing that wellness skill to build like a capacity
Yeah,
for to expand the resilience zone. Is that a way to
it
characterize
could
it?
be, but it's also a way for a person to know that they can sense. Because
Got
when,
it.
when you try to bring something forward and they go, I don't feel anything, people feel shame.
I
And
see. Yeah.
I say, no, I said, this is just what you've come to see me because we do this work. And so I've seen this before. It just means that there's different ways that we're going to open the door. Because one of my most important things that I try to do in my life is not to contribute to shame. That people walk, when you have trauma, as I'm sure most of you know, shame is the bedfellow. And so I said, no, no, your nervous system is reacting the way a nervous system would react for what you've told me you've experienced. So now we're coming with, oh, we're going to learn about also what exists inside, but you didn't maybe know that it existed. Or just like, going by that little quote of that little lady in the Philippines, thank you for reminding me what I knew but had forgotten. Sometimes people have never known that it was there. So we're like, it's almost like it was shrouded, and we're opening up a window, or opening up this window for them to see it's possible. And that's why I'm so believe in that little statement. Adversity is not destiny. We can convey hope when sometimes they don't sense it themselves, and sometimes it can brush off on people. But it is hard when you ask someone about, is there anything that uplifts you, or and they say nothing. But that also is diagnostic because I want to make sure I'm really doing a good screen for suicidality if someone has no way, if they're not saying anything is uplifting them, or there is no resources in their life, because that may be the person who's thinking about ending their life. So I want to make sure that I do all my due diligence to doing no harm and to do those full assessments.
Great. There's a question here. Can you say more about completing a survival response for someone who's had a traumatic car accident? I'm not sure what this would look like and wondering if you could explain how to guide a client through this.
Oh my gosh, it's one of my favorite things to do because I live in Los Angeles, right? As Jeff knows, because he grew up there. Cars are everywhere. If we have a group of people from LA, I go, who's been in a car accident? Everybody raises their hand. So we were not supposed to be going fast in little boxes as human beings. So that's number one. So when you look at the orienting, and I'm going to give you a personal experience to demonstrate it. I was hit by a drunk driver from behind. So I didn't get to see the threat. So the first part of the continuum is orienting, and orienting is very important. Like if there was a loud noise outside your window right now, you turn, right? And say, what is it? That what is it is a natural response, reaction to something that's novel in the environment. I mean, they started studying this in the early 1900s about this orienting response. So if you didn't get to orient, and I'm trying to, and the therapist is working with me with this thing that happened to me, which I went to one of my therapists that helped me with this. So he'd say, well, Elaine, as you're telling me about this car accident, what happened again? And I go, well, the car came behind me and I went like this with my hand. He said, well, can we pause for a second? We have all the time in the world now. So you said you weren't able to see him. So what is the impulse of what your body wants to do right now? And I said, well, I want to turn and I want to look. And so as I turned my head, and he said, so what are you noticing right now? I said, well, I can see the car coming. And so what's the impulse? And I was holding a wheel. I said, I would just turn my wheel. He said, well, notice what's happening inside your body as you're turning the wheel. And literally, oh, well, he didn't hit me. And I started to cry. And he just went past me because I ended up in the emergency room. I was injured. And so I started to cry. And he said, well, what are you noticing? But I was still holding the wheel. I said, well, I'm feeling some kind of relief. And I said, but I want to come back here. And as I came back to midline, you just notice I just took a deep breath as I'm just remembering it. Is that so funny? Anyway, so then I started to shake, and the shaking is a release of the autonomic nervous system. My body had so much shaking, and he just said, just notice how your body is releasing. And I went like, I must have gone like this for 10 minutes because that was a pretty big shock to my nervous system. And then I went like this to my head, and then I looked back again and I go, he didn't hit me. And then I took a deep breath because, of course, he did hit me. But in that moment, in implicit memory, he didn't hit me, right? And then I said, even though he hit me, I survived. And he said, well, can you notice all the sensations connected to survival? That I also cried again, but sweet tears, not sad tears, relief tears. And that whole integration happened at that moment. But I'm giving you that was just that kind
Mhm.
of car accident. But I've worked with so many car accidents. Sometimes when people haven't had a lot of developmental trauma, I can work with someone 1 or 2 sessions and that can clear the car accident. It's really quite powerful. There's a really good book that was written by Diane Poole Heller and Larry Heller when they were still married. It's about car accidents. And they have a really good little model in there. It's based on SE. It's a little bit different than what I would do, but I think it's a really good start. And of
Great.
course, I don't want to say you don't have to go get my book, not connected to anything that's going to be contribute to me, but I also talk about it in my book.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Thank you. Is it hard for clients who are in a heightened state to listen to their bodies, but understand the importance of practice?
It can be hard because it's hard for them if they're in the high zone to pay attention and so that's why sometimes using what we call help now strategies. And the help now strategies are, some of you already know these, but I've kind of just put them in a menu. I might say, maybe it'd be helpful if you could just name the colors in the room. um, let's count down together from 20. Or if there's a lot of agitation, if they're in the high zone, I said, sometimes you want to just do something with me really quickly because sometimes it helps get that energy out because I don't look at it as negative, right? So pushing against the wall with your hands and pushing, 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 get some of that. You can see them down regulate, come back into their zone of well-being. And what's so interesting about pushing against the wall, because the occupational therapist person will know this, but when we use the large muscles of the arms and the legs, it helps to down-regulate high zone states, and it helps upregulate when you're in the low zone. I just helped with a really terrible tragedy that happened in Calabasas, where a tree fell on a child during a camp, and all the children saw it, and the child was actually died. And I worked with the counselors that were there, helping the children, and of course, seeing this horrific thing at the end of a camp day. This happened in July. And so I saw with some of the camp counselors that they were in a low zone state, but they didn't know to call it that. They just said they were just like, I just feel like there's a film over my eyes. And so what we did, myself and a psychologist that we worked together, Mike Sapp, we had them get up and stand, and we had everybody pushing against the wall. Afterwards, one of the people who had trouble um, actually was not able to play her musical instrument since the event happened. It was about a month after. Um, we got a report later that after that, it was like her nervous system got jolted back into regulation, and she was able to play her instrument again. I mean, the person who was in charge of it wanted me to know that. She said, I would never have thought that such an easy intervention could help someone. Now, that's not going to be the only thing that probably that young person needs to do. But see, getting someone back into that zone so they can at least do life again and start to sense their vitality. In what I think happens, and I think this is bearing out with the research about the wellness skills, and Help Now is one of the wellness skills, is that we really are reducing the impact, I think, of people developing PTSD, because we're intervening right in the beginning. So for that, I remember leaving that saying, I'm grateful I know these skills, because otherwise, how do you help, these young kids from age 17 to 20 working in a camp that just probably saw the worst thing in their life?
Yeah, I'm sorry. That's awful.
It was
It's
an
awful image.
awful
Yeah.
thing. Yeah.
Uh, um, question, Lynette Reed says, I love your reframe of fawning. Can you say more about your tending or and
Ah,
befriending perspective?
yes, 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 yes. I'm so glad you said that. So first of all, I'm going to tell you that if you go to Elaine Miller-Karas Psychology Today, put in Tend and Befriend, I wrote an article about it. So it's very succinctly, it's like a 3-minute read. But anyway, Dr. Shelley Taylor from UCLA, she came up with Tending and Befriending that came out of how she was observing people in her department when there was a stress, that the women would often go into one office all together with their coffee, and the men would go to individual rooms. I think that just sparked it. Not to say that men always do this, because I don't want to overgeneralize anything. But so she started doing research about it. And the whole, and think about this. So, and she talks in her work that think about as ages passed, women who bore the children were the ones who took care of the children primarily. And so if there was the marauder from the, neighboring village that came in to take over the village, if she tended and befriended the aggressor, that increased her chance of survival and that of the social group and of the children. So it makes so logical sense, right? And we don't call fight, flight, or freeze maladaptive. We know it's a biological imperative, right? The same thing is true with tending and befriending. So, and also I've worked with the LA Rape Crisis Center, and I want to bring this into that tending and befriending. When I started talking about it in this way, I can't tell you that therapists go, oh my gosh, we just brought this to one of my clients. And we have heard, and maybe some of you have had this experience, that you knew this person was going to rape you, and you said, oh, well, what if I give you dinner? Trying to do things to tend and befriend that rapist, for example, to see if maybe you can get away. Maybe you didn't get away and you ended up being raped, but then that person gets in court, they say, well, she consented, she even gave me dinner. Do you see how tending and befriending, that is a survival strategy, can be used against women or men or whoever is being attacked? But I think that when we look at it that way, it changes the way we look at those kinds of behaviors, which I think people also call it the Stockholm syndrome. I would much rather see tending and befriending as being really in the literature about that. And actually, coincidentally, it's one of the, I can see how many people read my articles on Psychology Today. It's probably the most read article, is the tending and befriending one, because I think people are curious about, just like you're curious about that. But the other thing that she found, that when we tend and befriend, is that endorphins are released in our system, that if we think about the positive feedback loop, that that could decrease the intensity of the perpetrator trying to attack us, right? Because of that. But also when apparently um, that uh, this these endorphins is it's an antagonist to the cortisol. So there's something that happens neurobiologically to reduce the threat response in the perpetrator. Isn't that interesting? I mean, I thought it was fascinating. So read about her. I mean, I talk about her in my book, but in that article, I do reference her and talk about this more in detail. But I think
Mhm,
that if we started bringing tending and befriending in,
mhm,
much better way to say it.
mhm. Great. A question here. How do you address clients that fantasize aggressive retribution as a strategy to restore feelings of power or status to avoid feelings of shame or fear? For example, Kirk assassination.
Yeah, boy. Well, first of all, I'd work with it biologically again. And so, we always have to be careful, though. I mean, here we are therapists. People do commit homicide. So we always have to do those kinds of assessments. But actually, this has come up about completing survival responses. Are we putting in people's heads ideas to hurt people? And I think what happens when we work it out biologically, we're actually helping them discharge and release that energy that's connected to aggression. I think that a lot of aggression that happens in the world, this is my personal belief, and that is it's undigested trauma. So that anger that you may feel because of what just happened um, and what that young man did, who was clearly, disturbed, but also really upset about hateful, I never would ever think that we should kill anybody for their thoughts. But I think if we worked with the body of that person, that might have been able to help release that so the person never acted out on the thought. And so if your client has that, and it may be he wants that power back because it was taken away from him and he was so shamed. But what tends to happen when you release the energy connected to the thwarted um, survival response that was not able to be completed, the person releases it. And what tends to happen is more solution focused thinking, just like what happened with the study in Rwanda because there were statistically significant reductions in depression, anxiety, traumatic stress symptoms, but increase in compassion and forgiveness when you work with the body to release that distress that's connected to thwarted defensive responses. We need to do more research about it. I think that's the bottom line of it. But I've seen where that aggression is turned to sometimes compassion and forgiveness and forgiveness is a very hard thing. It's hard to forgive some of the things, and certainly I've had a hard time, and people have told me the things that happened to them with their children. Um, but that's part of what we have to do for ourselves too, is how do we handle horrible things that have happened to kids, and how do we release our own stress around it? But it can be very helpful.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. Can you talk a little more about, question is, can you talk a little more about the integration phase? I know we do not offer interpretation, but do you invite them to examine how their traumatic experience is impacting them currently?
Yeah, well, see, yeah, exactly. And so what happens is, of course, we would do all those same things that you might, 'cause when I think about it, all those classes I took about interpretation, I go, oh my gosh, it's so much easier to ask them. So how do I know first? So when I see that integration piece, and as I mentioned earlier, you can see that take their deeper breath. Sometimes people will actually start to move their body. It's almost like they're like it's like a clock that's been overwound and they start to release the sensations in their body. And, there's a lot of shaking. Sometimes there's yawning. Yawning is a release of the autonomic nervous system as well. And sometimes there's a shudder and they go like this. And it's like, and I said, this is that. So that's when my cue, when I see that integration piece in the body, because we want to integrate not only the body, but how they think and feel about their experience in the past. So I say, well, when you think about that now, what are there any thoughts, feelings, and meanings about it? And I mean, I have never heard. I mean, and all the work that I've done, I mean, I've treated thousands of people at this point. I've never heard a person from that space not say something that was absolutely uh, almost sacred or transformative for them. Like what I said earlier, oh, it wasn't my fault. And really sense it inside their body, right? um, that moment is just beautiful. Or they might say, if you watch, I'm in my stuff that I have for you, there's a video, it's 18 minutes long, and it's her name, person's name is Linda. And she had a surgical procedure where she woke up and felt that the doctors weren't paying attention to her and that she was going to die because she couldn't breathe. But you can see in that what I asked her about and what her new meaning was about the experience. And it was not only she had let go of the anger against the anesthesiologist that told her she was fine. She had great love and admiration for the nurse that said, "Let me see if I can clear this out," if, that listened to her. And then she had a reorganization going, well, I'm going to have surgery again, but next time I'm going to talk to the doctor and anesthesiologist before the surgery, make sure that they know what happened to me. So basically the part of the meaning of this particular event was her being more of an advocate for herself in the future. So it was not only that she felt better and she was able to let go about the anesthesiologist, but it's about going forward. So you see all those components, almost like puzzle pieces, and some of those animations that we see coming together, and the new meaning being so much a part of it. Um, it's really quite profound to see it, and it's different than, I did a lot of cognitive based, therapy for a long time that I was a fairly effective therapist, but it wasn't the same. There's something about this that is like the missing piece that you can add to your practice. Because for those of you that are trained in many things, I say that TRIM works well with others. Like I have a good friend in Connecticut who's a psychiatric nurse practitioner, Kate Wheeler, who is has written a book this thick of all the interventions that you can use as a psychiatric nurse practitioner. I actually think it's a good book for any of us to use. Well, TRIM is in there as one of the interventions. You may know her because she was the past president of EMDRIA. So she's a big EMDR person. Well, she saw how the model could be integrated with the EMDR. And so that it didn't have to be an either or. It could be, yes, we could still do the EMDR protocol, but we can also work with how we create resources. And if you see people within, let's say, EMDR that I'm sure many of you are trained in, and instead of saying go with that, when you see the body's responses and you can see that the energy's building for completing a survival response, you can drop EMDR and say, do you have an impulse of something your body wants to do? And when they do that and you see them, that integration, then just go back to bilateral. You can just go ahead and track it inside, and they can have that same sort of release and can actually, I think, potentiate the experience of putting the two together. I'm in my Psychology Today blogs, there's two that I write about EMDR and TRIM, and one of them is I interviewed Kate about it. So she's interviewed in one of the articles. And they're all really easy reads, you guys. It doesn't take you a long time. They're meant for
Great.
short read.
The questions keep rolling in, and we're
Right, well, I'm here as
at a
long as
minute.
I want to be.
Can you say maybe 20 seconds about working with patients with addictions in this model?
Yes, yes. So there are different treatment programs that have integrated the model. There's one big one in North Carolina, a state-led one that everyone's trained in the wellness skills. That means everyone. That means the person who works in finance, because they wanted to have that common language of the zones. Um, but I think what's really important with addiction is learning the wellness skills of learning that you can identify triggers, not just emotional and thinking triggers, but sensory triggers, and adding that to the bucket so that they understand, oh, it's when I have that pit in my stomach and I want to reach for the whatever. But if you know that pit comes in and you go, what else can be true? There's one of the self-help skills is shift and stay. So if you have that pit, then okay, I can shift to a resource. I could shift. Oh, I remember when I was with Jeff. Now we've been to Big Sur together. So, but then that changes the nervous system. So instead of that pit being there, the pit dissipates, you're back into a more integrated state so that you may not want to use that you may not want to use, so that it can be integrated as part of that. But then also, just like with anything, that people that have addictions have had lots of trauma. So if we can help them complete a survival response, that's another element of integration that can help them feel better in mind, body, and spirit. And maybe they're still holding on with a lot of shame, which of course, we know addiction and shame are bedfellows as well, that can also help to dissipate some of the shame. And with shame, when people say, but Elaine, that shame is, there's still the vestige of it. And I'll say, well, let's just work with the shame. When you say shame, where does it land in the body? And so I can just work with the feeling. And so when I actually just worked with someone recently with shame, and then most of it dissipated. And she said, well, there's still a teeny bit, but most of it's gone. I said to her, well, do you think a little bit of it needs to be there? She goes, yeah, it needs to be there to remind me that I don't have to be there anymore. So it was almost like that little tiny little dot of sensory that she needed to keep to remind herself of, which I think isn't that brilliant? I mean, that wasn't me, that's her body, because it was her that was saying, yeah, now I know what that is. Pretty exciting, actually.
Yes.
I never get bored with it. I'm old too, you guys. So imagine that.
Well, fantastic. And thank you, Elaine, for wonderful presentation, for going with me to Big Sur. And
I'm so sorry about the internet, guys. That certainly wasn't planned.
no, it's a challenge to we can see how you can come into your resilience zone and solve the
Well,
problem.
I
Thank
did.
you.
I have to tell you, that little new iPhone of mine was better than
Yes.
the one in.
In the hotel, yes. So reminding everybody, if you wish to receive continuing education credits, just complete the evaluation survey that will automatically show in the browser as we end the webinar. There have been questions too about getting Elaine's slides, and those will all be sent to all participants as well. So thank you, Elaine. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. We've been connected here, and it's a kind of sudden sending us back into our office spaces that happens when we disconnect here. We hope everybody can join us again October 8th. And for now, time to say goodbye. And this concludes our grand rounds for today. So thanks again, and see you later.
Everybody really, really